This video is going to be a demonstration of panel servicing on an LG television. It's going to demonstrate replacing the TFT, also known as the sub panel. It's also going to demonstrate replacing the backlights and testing the backlights, reassembling the product, and final testing. Tools that you're going to need: a cordless drill. Make sure the cordless drill is set to a very low torque. 1 is preferable. You're going to need a hand Phillips number 2, a hand Phillips screwdriver number 1, and a small flat blade screwdriver. You're also going to need a pair of cloth gloves. They're clean and new. You're also going to need these suction cups, or similar to these suction cups, so we can remove the TFT safely. We'll start using the cordless drill, and we'll remove the stand. Now that we have the stand off, we'll remove the back. In many of our televisions, there's 2 or 3 different types of screws that are in the back. Some are a little larger than others, and some are basic sheet metal screws. So pay attention to which screw is removed from what position. Before we go any further, we want to plug the TV in and turn it on. We'll turn the TV on, and as you see, the LEDs are blue in this unit. And then we just want to unplug power from the television. That will benefit us later when we're through replacing the LEDs. Sometimes it's easier just to remove this wiring harness, so you can remove this bracket. The 2 sub brackets for the stands, they'll also have to be removed. Now, I'm going to remove the speakers to allow you to see a little better. There's a clear cover here. Some of the times it'll be a metal cover that will have a couple of screws holding it in. We'll have to remove this before we'll be able to disassemble the panel. You can use your hand or a small putty knife to reach under this and get it removed. Now be careful around these 2 ribbon cables. They're very easily damaged. Now, we'll also have to remove this from the panel where it's also glued on. Save this because you will have to reinstall it. At this time, we'll disconnect these 2 ribbon cables to make things easier later. Now, when we flip the television over, we're going to temporarily replace the speakers so they don't flop around. Now, when we get ready to flip the television over, if you've been receiving any parts or any packaging, then look for some pieces similar to these. What we'll use these for is to position them here, here, and here when we flip the television over. This will support the panel and prevent us from having to remove all these boards and speakers, and we can leave them attached. At this point, I do want to point out, due to the way some of our panels are assembled, there'll be a screw here, here, and here on the end, which these have already been removed. These screws are longer than the screws that go on the sides. These screws that you still see in place, you cannot remove those until that clear cover or metal cover in some cases has been removed. It will not expose those screws. At this point, I'm going to turn the panel over and finish removing the screws. You can also look under the TV and make sure that the styrofoam is not laying on any of the boards. Now that supports the television and raises it up to where it's a little easier to work on. Now all the way around the escutcheon there are screws that will have to be removed. This is where we'll use a number 1 screwdriver, and these screws are small, so keep up with them. There'll be some light clips that will hold the escutcheon in place. Just lightly pull out on the escutcheon, and the corners have a little bit more reinforcement. Now you remove the escutcheon. And the boards that we saw earlier are in some retainers. In some of our units, you have 2 pieces of grounding tape that hold these boards in place. It provides a ground for the board. Just remove the tape just from the board. Now, these rubber grommets, if you push downward on these and then pull out on the top, downward just a little bit and then out on the top, they will release. Now you can remove these boards so it frees the panel. When we remove it, it can be taken off. Okay. And repeat this for the other side. Once we pull the boards out of the small rubber grommets in the back, our panel is now free and clear. The 2 suction cups that we mentioned in our tool set, about 1/3 of the way in from each side and centered from top to bottom. You're going to attach the suction cups to the panel itself. Okay. These put a tremendous amount of pressure on the panel, so once we remove the panel, we're going to quickly remove the suction cups from the panel. To easily remove the panel, you lift up from the top first, very gently, and let air get under the panel. When you get about this angle, you lift straight up so you don't put any pressure on the ribbon cables at the bottom of the panel. Now we're going to place the panel in the shipping container that we opened earlier. When you receive a new panel, this is the type of packaging that will be in the cardboard box. The panel is identified which end is top and which end is bottom. Top, written here, is indicating that this is face up for the panel. The other side of the box has bottom on it, which indicates that is the back side of the panel. You always want to start with this top facing up. So when we open the panel, which there'll be tape all the way around that'll have to be cut. This should be the face-up version of the panel, or face-up side of the panel. There'll be a styrofoam sheet to protect the panel. We'll lay the styrofoam sheet here and line up these guide holes. Here's our new panel. If we look at the ribbon cables, the chip should be facing down that is on these ribbon cables. This is the chip that I'm referring to. That'll also verify that this is face up. Also, your barcode on here is put on top of the thin film that is on the panel to protect the panel as well. We'll remove that film once we install the panel in the television. How this packaging will be used is when we remove the original panel out of the television, we'll lay it here. Then we'll pick this panel up, install it in the television, then fold the packaging back up again. Now, if we're just replacing just the TFT, we're already ready to place the new TFT in place. If we're servicing the backlights, we've got a little further to go. This trim that the panel sits in, the TFT sits in, is clipped onto the metal frame. So we'll have to use a small screwdriver Now we can remove the cradle that the panel rests in. These are your light distribution layers. It's very critical that you do not get fingerprints on these layers because you will not be able to get them off. These tabs that you see across the top and across the bottom. Some of these tabs are offset, so there is a top and a bottom direction that these go on. The easy way to remove these is to lift them off of the tabs, which there are multiple layers, so be careful that they don't slide apart. Under those is a layer that is a little bit thicker. We're going to lift all of these off at the same time. Just roll with your wrist a little bit to lift them up, clench them together, and lift everything off at one time. Lay these down on a blanket and keep them together. Now, we also have to remove this layer. This is your light reflective layer. These tabs will turn a quarter of a turn or a third of a turn with just a little bit of pressure, and when they line up, it comes straight out. Now, if you notice where this reflective layer is sliced and it can open up slightly, there is a connector in between these. These are in a straight line. Many times in some panels they will be in a zigzag line. Now we have to remove this layer, the reflection layer. Since there's only 3 tabs that hold the reflective sheet down and hold the panel away from it, what they've done is this lens that's over the LED, this reflective layer is up under the edge of the lens. What that does for us is every one of the lenses holds the reflective layer in place. So to remove the reflective layer, get it off of these tabs, and then what we have to do is we have to pull up on the reflective layer this way and let it pop out from under the LED lens. What I'm doing is I'm pulling up on this reflective layer as I go across and release. Now our LEDs are exposed. Now on many of our panels, you'll see a label similar to this L. It could be a B or an L or an L1 or an L2 or a R1 or an R2. And you'll see somewhere stamped on the metal, just over the LEDs or just under the LEDs, a label similar to that. What we're going to do now is remove the LEDs, and when we unwrap new LEDs, the proper LED strip will go in the right position. Notice this strip has 3 LEDs, this strip also has 4 LEDs. This says A type, this says B type. Now to remove the LED strip, it's just lightly bonded to the back of the panel. These connectors will have to be unplugged. Now, with these connectors, there are two types of connectors. One, you will see a tab sticking up here and another tab sticking up here. You squeeze those tabs together just slightly and lift straight up. Then you have this type of connector, which you may find inside of a lot of our panels. It has no tabs sticking up here and here. This is a different type of connector. Don't pull on the wires. You can take your small screwdriver and get up under a lip right here, and you have to lift in an upward direction, pushing backwards. The connector will flip upward. Okay. As the connector flips upward, it may pop out. This one will do the same. Now we finish removing the LED strips. When we remove the LED strips, there's a bonding layer that's stuck to the panel. Before you remove those, when you open the LEDs, this is the way it should look. This is replacement adhesive strips to replace these. Now this should peel up just like tape. Making sure which side you put which piece of tape on. If you look at these dowel pins, then you'll notice they line up with the holes in the tape. The same for this section. Okay. So these go in this side, these will go on this side. When you pull the tape up or pull the backing up, it can come up one of two ways, where the tape is stuck to the clear section or stuck to the white section. You want it stuck to the white section when you peel it up. Then we will line this up with the first dowel pin. We'll line it up between these two dowel pins. And we'll line it up with this dowel pin and between these two dowel pins here. We'll do the same for the other side. Leave the white covering over these to protect them while you're working on one strip at a time. The very end, make sure both ends are pressed down firmly, because when you pull this up, you want the tape to remain on the panel. Now we're ready for our LED strips. When you unpackage the LED strips, you'll find all of your A-type together and all of your B-type together. Now if you remember, all of our A-types were on one side, our B-types were on the other. When installing the new LED strips, line up the dowel pins, the one in the center of the strip and the one where the strip goes between the dowel pins. Lightly tack the LED strip down, because you're going to have to connect the other section to this section. And lightly tack it down in place. Once you're finished, now you can go back and press the LED strip down firmly. Repeat the process. Now, one of the reasons that this strip goes up under this section of LEDs, so you can easily lift it up to make the connection between this strip and the second strip of LEDs. Earlier when we started this process, we turned the television on and we just unplugged it from the wall outlet. The benefit that we have at this point when we've completed the circuit and replaced the LEDs is we can plug the television back in and our LEDs should turn on. Now we can verify that all of our LEDs are working, and if we tap around on the panel just lightly, we can make sure that we don't have any of the LEDs flickering due to a poor connection in the wiring harness or between the strips of LEDs. Now we can unplug it and we can start reassembling the product. Now, just like the way we removed these, we put these back in place. Over and under each one of the LED lenses, this sheet will snap in place. We reinstall the clips. These two elongated pieces will slide right through the panel, and you'll turn it to where it's 90 degrees. On each one of the corners, you need to make sure that if it says upper and lower on the corners, that you get this in the correct position. In many of our corners, you'll have a small hole that will depict the bottom piece. I'll put the gloves back on to make sure that I don't get any fingerprints. Now your lower piece is going to fit between all of your guides, and then your upper pieces, keep them together and line those up with the guides. Okay. Once we have those in place, now we're ready for the cradle for the TFT. Now, remember when we removed this, there is a top and a bottom section where the ribbon cables actually connect. So this will also snap in place. Once that's in place, now we're ready to put our new panel in. Putting the panel in place, if you line it up at the bottom and line up your ribbon cables where they go in the grooves, and slowly let the panel down in place. Now you can use the handles to make sure whether you're in correct position. On each side, here, 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 and here, the plastic bevels inward towards the panel. Now, the panel has to be flat all the way down to where you feel all four of these ridges on each corner. Now you can remove pressure from the panel, remove the suction cups, and your panel is in place. Now, when we're putting these boards back in place, you want to start with the board at an angle and put it in the bottom first, and then just push downward, and it will slip into place into the rubber grommet. The tape that we pulled off earlier will have to be put back in place so the board will have a good ground. Every once in a while, one of these rubber grommets will pop off on you. If you look, there is a little dash or a notch in here that will tell you where that needs to go back in place, because this grommet should not interfere with the grounding connections, nor should it interfere with the LVDS cable that, or the ribbon cable that connects the panel. So if those come off, that's not a big deal. Now again, push it down in the bottom, then let it seat in the top. Okay, the board should be free and there's not any pressure on any of the ribbon cables. Put our grounding strips back on. Now we reconnect the panel to the T-Con. Now, on many of our televisions, this blue cover. You can actually grip this with your fingers and get that in place. If you fold it just a little bit, you can actually grip it and you have more control over the ribbon cable. Make sure the ribbon cable is seated completely before you punch that down. The black lines that are here, make sure that those lines are straight and not at an angle. Otherwise, you don't have these seated very well. Now those boards are secure. We'll lay the TV back down. If you're installing a new panel, you'll see a sticker somewhere on the panel that has a barcode on it. That sticker is on a thin film that's over the top of the panel to protect the panel. What you'll have to do is you'll have to look at the very edge of the panel, and you'll have to start that cellophane layer. It's actually a filter layer, and you'll have to slowly peel that off. Don't peel it off too quickly, otherwise you'll lift the panel out of its cradle and possibly crack it. But that thin film will have to be removed prior to putting the bezel in place, because you can't get to the edge of it once the bezel is in place. This layer is your support glass. This layer is your TFT, and this layer is the protective layer. This layer is the one that needs to be removed. So find an area that's been partially pulled up or start at the corner and carefully remove. Remember, the longer screws went in the bottom of the bezel. Now that the panel's secure, we can plug the unit in to ensure that everything is connected correctly. Our panel is working, so we can proceed to finishing the rest of this installation or rebuild of the panel. At this point, you'll want to turn the TV back over on its face. Now, like we did before, we had to remove these speakers. We're going to have to move them out of place again. Now we'll have to reinstall these strips. The easy way to line these up is, again, using these dowel pins that are provided, one on each end. Again, the two dowel pin holes and the two dowel pins. Now we'll put our speakers back in place, which the tab on the speaker goes in this slot, and the two rubber grommets here and here will go back in the holes. Now the two brackets that the TV mounts fit onto has a tab on each side. This tab will slide into this slot. And again, this tab will slide into this slot. This tab will just sit in place. Now our piece across the bottom that we removed before, these guides have to all sit in place. It's very important that this tape be put back in place to filter out any noise that might be picked up by those wires. When putting the screws back in, there are two screws and sometimes more that will differ from the other screws. These screws will go around your main board, around your connection area to anchor the back down, and the other that's a little bit bigger than the rest of them will also go around your power cord. The rest of the screws that hold the back in place will be the same. This appearing gives us an indication that the keyboard is working.